The wind howled across the plains like a wounded animal, dragging dust and memory alike through the broken slats of the old fence. Dusk leaned over the horizon, thick with the scent of burnt sage and storm. Thunder grumbled somewhere behind the mountains, low and brooding. Thomas Rourke stood on his porch, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of a battered hat, one hand resting loosely on the butt of a revolver he hadn't fired in 15 years. The sky cracked open with a flash, and for a second the whole valley lit up. Far off, in the distance where the land turned to jagged stone and bone-dry gullies, something moved. A shape. Then another. Too small for deer. Too fast for wolves. But what really set Thomas on edge was the sound that followed, high and sharp, like the cry of a wounded bird. He turned without a word and stepped inside the house, the screen door creaking mournfully behind him. Martha looked up from the stove, her face a map of sun and sorrow. Her apron was dusted with flour, her hands busy, but her eyes knew him too well. "You heard it too," she said softly. "Yep." He hung his hat on the nail by the door, his boots leaving faint tracks across the worn wood floor. "Could have been coyotes." "You don't believe that?" "No," he admitted. "I don't." For a moment, silence hung between them, not uncomfortable but heavy. It had lived in their home longer than either would admit, ever since the letters from the doctor had come back with words like unlikely and sorry. 20 years of watching seasons change from the same porch, of praying and pretending and swallowing disappointment like dry whiskey. Martha stirred the beans on the stove. "You think it's trouble?" "Could be." He didn't need to say more. Trouble in Dust Haven came in many shapes. Drifters with itchy trigger fingers, busted wagons with desperate families, outlaws riding fast and wild from a past that nipped at their heels. She met his eyes across the kitchen, something unreadable in her gaze. "You going out?" He nodded once. "Won't be long." The rifle came down from above the mantel, clean and oiled, though untouched in years. Thomas slid a box of shells into his coat pocket and stepped into the storm-heavy evening without looking back. He rode out toward the rise where the land dropped into a shallow basin. The sky had turned the color of rust, and lightning arced like whip cracks across the western edge. Rain hadn't come yet, but the air was thick with promise. He moved slow, listening. The only sound was the steady thud of hooves and the occasional rustle of the wind dragging through dry grass. Then, as he crested the hill, he saw it. A wagon. Or what was left of one. Its canvas was torn, sides riddled with arrows. One wheel lay a few feet away, shattered. The horse was gone. Blood stained the dirt near the driver's bench, old enough to be black now but still pungent in the air. Thomas dismounted, rifle ready. He scanned the area, every muscle coiled. That's when he heard it again. A voice. Faint. Fragile. "Help." He froze. Turned toward the rocks lining the edge of the basin. Another whisper, clearer now. A child. Keeping low, he approached the outcropping. Then he saw them. 5 small figures huddled behind a tumble of stone. Bare feet, torn clothes, eyes wide with terror and exhaustion. The eldest, a boy maybe 15, held a broken rifle across his lap. His jaw was tight, chin lifted in defiance despite the dried blood at his temple. Beside him, a girl of 13 clutched a smaller boy, whose stuttering breaths could be heard across the still air. The last 2 little ones clung together like kittens in a storm. Thomas lowered his weapon slowly. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said. "Name's Thomas Rourke. I got a ranch not far from here." None of them moved. "You all alone out here?" The eldest boy shifted, eyes narrowing. "Who sent you?" "No one. Saw your wagon. Heard the shot last night." The boy didn't answer. Thomas kept his voice steady, low. "You all hurt?" The girl glanced at the youngest, barely more than a toddler, face pale, shivering. She looked back at Thomas. "Milo's sick." Thomas nodded. "I got food. Water. Shelter." The boy finally spoke. "And what do you want for it?" The words hung sharp in the air. Not naive, not desperate, just raw with the kind of distrust that comes from watching too many promises break. "Nothing," Thomas said. "I ain't like whoever did this to your wagon." After a pause, the girl rose, helping the others to their feet. They moved together like a single animal made of 5 small bodies. Broken but not defeated. "All right," the boy said. "But if you lie, I'll know." Thomas didn't doubt that for a second. Martha stood on the porch, her arms crossed as the group rode into view. Rain had begun to fall in slow, heavy drops. She squinted, then her breath caught. Children. 5 of them. They looked like ghosts from another world, soaked, scraped, and silent. She stepped forward instinctively, but paused when she saw the oldest boy's eyes. hardened wounded. Not the kind that needed coddling. Thomas dismounted and nodded toward the house. We'll dry 'em off. They need warm food and rest. Martha nodded. Her gaze swept over the children again. You bring home orphans now? He didn't smile. Didn't have the heart to leave him. She stared at him for a beat, then moved aside, letting the group pass. Inside, the children huddled near the hearth. Martha set a pot of soup on the fire. Thomas tended the horses, not speaking but listening. He heard laughter. Quiet, cautious. Then a cough, Milo the smallest. A raspy, racking sound. Martha was already beside him, pressing a hand to his forehead. She looked up sharply. He's burning. Thomas nodded. We'll ride into town at first light. Doc Harvin still owes me a favor. She bit her lip, stroking Milo's damp hair. What happened out there? The girl answered this time. Men came. Said our pa didn't own the land we'd been living on. Said we were squatters. They shot him first. Her voice broke. The youngest boy, Benji, buried his face in her side. They burned the house. Mama told us to run. We didn't stop until we couldn't anymore. Thomas felt the heat in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper. Older. The same ache that used to come every spring when the daffodils bloomed and there was no child to run barefoot through them. The older boy finally gave his name. Caleb. The others followed in quiet voices. Lena. Benji. Sally. Milo. Thomas nodded. You're safe here. The fire cracked. Sally's small voice floated into the silence. Are you going to be our new daddy? Martha looked over, her hands still on Milo. Her eyes met Thomas's. Caleb stood suddenly. Don't say that, he snapped. Don't make them think that. They've lost too much already. Thomas held his gaze. I ain't making promises I can't keep. But you can't keep that one, Caleb said. No one ever does. Martha stood. Her voice was soft but firm. Maybe not yet. But sometimes healing starts with being warm and fed. We'll start there. Caleb didn't argue, but he didn't sit either. That night, after the children were asleep, tucked into blankets beside the fire, Thomas stood on the porch again. Rain fell steady now, soaking the earth. He could feel the weight of it pressing into the soil. Change. Growth. Or maybe just another storm. Martha joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. They'll need more than soup and kind words. I know. They'll need a future. He nodded, watching the road. They asked if we'd be their mama and daddy, she said after a pause. And it didn't scare me. Thomas swallowed. Scared the hell out of me. She gave a tired smile. That's how I know it's worth it. He didn't answer right away. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn scrap of fabric. Once a baby blanket, never used. He placed it on the porch rail where the wind could touch it. We'll see what tomorrow brings, he said. Behind them, the fire inside the house flickered gently. And somewhere in the distance, under the heartbeat rhythm of rain, a coyote howled, alone but not unheard. At the Rourke homestead, the night's chill had not yet left, and a quiet tension hovered in the air as dawn's first blush crept over the distant ridges. Thomas Rourke woke with a heavy heart, his mind still echoing the children's hesitant voices from the night before. Outside the modest dwelling, rain dripped steadily onto the dry earth, a gentle patter that belied the tumult hidden within. He stepped cautiously to the window, his gaze surveying the battered landscape. Memories of decades of solitude mingled with the promise of a future uncertain. In that quiet moment, every breath counted and every heartbeat resonated like the ticking of a clock counting down to an unknown reckoning. Martha had risen early as always and was already in the kitchen, methodically preparing a modest breakfast. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the aroma of baked bread, and the soft murmur of her whispered hopes filled the space as though warding off the darkness of what had been and what might come. Her movements were deliberate and unhurried, each measured step a quiet defiance against the sorrow that had long haunted them both. Ever since the children had appeared on that fateful night, she had embraced a tenderness that belied her inner strength, even as the remnants of past grief clung stubbornly to her spirit. As pale light seeped through the window, she paused to peer outside, sensing in the cool morning air the stirrings of change and challenge entwined. In the yard, the children began to stir, as if awakened by an instinct deeper than hunger alone. Caleb, with eyes as hard as flint and a bearing that spoke of unspoken burdens, emerged first from the corner where he slept on an old canvas spread over rough boards. His posture was rigid, every muscle coiled from years of hardship and the need to protect those who depended on him. Not far behind, Lena moved quietly, her motions careful and deliberate as she gathered the few personal trinkets that connected her to a past lost in pain. Benji, still fighting the drowsiness of sleep, rubbed his eyes and whispered a timid greeting, while Sally clung to an old ragged doll, her wide eyes brimming with unvoiced emotions. Little Milo, barely able to stand without assistance, gripped a faded blanket as though it were the only anchor in his young, uncertain life. Thomas stepped outside with measured caution, the sound of his boots on gravel drawing the wary eyes of the children. They watched him with a mixture of suspicion and fragile hope. His face, weathered by time and marked by past disappointments, bore the weight of his solitary years, yet his voice held a warmth that belied his battle-hardened exterior. "I'm here to help," he said, each word chosen with care as if the promise itself needed to be solidified in the hush of the early day. "This land may be harsh, but it can give us all a chance to start over." His tone was sincere and steady, revealing a vulnerability hidden beneath layers of guarded resolve. Caleb stepped forward, his voice low and cautious. "Are you here to take us away or leave us stranded to face more hurt?" His words, simple yet heavy with the pain of constant loss, hung in the air as a challenge and an appeal for understanding. Thomas met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here to steal or to abandon, but to offer a refuge from the storm that has chased you all this way." Caleb's eyes narrowed briefly, weighing Thomas's words with the skepticism born of too many broken promises, but the subtle warmth in his tone slowly began to thaw his hardened exterior. Lena, ever watchful, added in a soft voice, "But what if the refuge comes with conditions we cannot bear?" Her question was not a rejection but a plea, fraught with the cautious hope of someone who had endured too much to trust easily. Before Thomas could reply, Martha appeared at the door, her presence a gentle reassurance amid the wary exchange. "We do not offer empty promises," she said quietly, her steady gaze moving from Caleb to Lena and then softly to Thomas. "We make do with what we have, a warm meal, a safe place, and the chance to mend what was broken." Her words, spoken with genuine care, brought a tentative calm to the morning that had so far been laden with uncertainty. Later that day, the homestead began to stir with the small, steady rituals of life reawakening. The children, though still guarded, slowly integrated themselves into the daily tasks that defined their new existence. Thomas sat with Caleb and Lena under the shade of an old oak, teaching them how to mend a tear in the worn saddle blanket. His voice, at times gruff and firm, softened when he recalled memories of his own youthful adventures in a world far less cruel than the one he now inhabited. Caleb listened intently, absorbing every word as if it might rewrite the harsh lessons of his past, while Lena's inquisitive eyes flickered with the promise of understanding, each lesson weaving a subtle thread of connection between teacher and student. Even Benji, Sally, and Milo found small roles in the quiet choreography of daily life, whether it was fetching water, tidying the modest barn, or simply sitting in silent companionship as the others labored. Yet even amid these moments of gentle normalization, an undercurrent of unease persisted. There were whispers carried by the wind, rumors of a gang of outlaws whose dark reputation stretched far beyond the borders of Dust Haven. The outlaws, whose presence was known by the scarred faces of men and the haunted eyes of those who had survived their wrath, claimed the very land on which the homestead stood. This knowledge cast long shadows over every interaction, an invisible threat that neither time nor tender moments could fully dispel. In hushed conversations late in the afternoon, with the children gathered in small clusters and the adults exchanging worried glances, the subject of the gang emerged like a specter at the feast of their newfound family. No one spoke its name aloud, yet the mere mention of it sent shivers through the collective heart of the homestead. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the family reconvened on the weathered front porch, a single bastion against the encroaching night. Caleb's gaze remained fixed on Thomas, the unspoken question in his eyes mingling with determination. "We must be ready," Caleb murmured, his voice nearly lost amid the rustle of the wind. The earnestness in his tone left no room for doubt. Their lives, fragile as they were, now lay under the constant threat of a force that sought to reclaim what it believed was rightfully its own. Martha's response was calm but resolute. "We do not yet know their designs, but fear alone will not protect us," she said, her voice a quiet promise that united both courage and tenderness. "We have found each other here, and in that there is strength. Together we must forge a path to keep this refuge secure." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present, imparting a sense of unity that, although tentative, began to bind their hearts together in a shared purpose. Before the sun completely sank below the hills, a sudden clatter disturbed the fragile calm. The sound of hooves and the jarring clang of metal against wood ripped through the quiet, and every head snapped toward the disturbance. Thomas's hand instinctively moved toward his revolver as he stepped off the porch, his eyes scanning the dimming landscape for the source of the interruption. Out of the gathering dusk emerged a solitary rider, shrouded in a long tattered duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over eyes that burned with urgency and quiet menace. The rider dismounted at the edge of the clearing, each deliberate step measured and weighty as though he carried news neither welcome nor benign. Without a word, the rider produced from beneath his cloak a small, worn package, and thrust it into Caleb's outstretched hand. The brief contact between stranger and child was charged with an energy that set every nerve on edge, and as quickly as he had appeared, the rider melted back into the gathering night, swallowed by shadows and uncertainty. Caleb's fingers tightened around the package as he stared at it, a mix of trepidation and dawning realization crossing his face. Martha stepped forward, her tone soft yet resolute as she questioned, "Who are you and what does this mean for us?" But the echo of her words faded into the night long before an answer could emerge. Thomas knelt beside Caleb and slowly unfolded the small, crinkled piece of paper concealed within the package. The ink, smeared by rain and time, formed words that were both a threat and a lament. It warned them to return something that, as far as they knew, had never been taken. His weathered eyes narrowed as he absorbed the note's implication, a heavy silence pressing down on them as they realized that forces from the past had not yet relinquished their hold. "It seems," Thomas said, his voice measured and low, "that the ghosts we thought were behind us have come to claim what they believe is theirs." The words struck a chord in everyone's heart, each syllable a hammer blow to the fragile peace they had begun to build. Caleb's voice, small but resolute, broke the spell of silence. "What are we supposed to give them back?" he asked, the weight of his earlier defiance replaced now by the raw uncertainty of their situation. Thomas's reply was grim. "I do not have the answer, but this note tells us one thing: our past is not done with us." Lena's eyes filled with quiet tears at the thought of old wounds reopening, while Benji's lip trembled with a fear too great for his small frame. Sally clutched her doll tighter, her gaze darting toward the darkening hills as if expecting danger to materialize in their very midst. Even little Milo, whose world had until now been a blur of half-remembered dreams, sensed that the family's newfound safety was now in jeopardy. As twilight surrendered its last glow to the coming night, the homestead seemed to breathe with an anxious expectancy. Each member of the group, whether by choice or chance, retreated into silent contemplation, pondering the ramifications of this unwelcome message. Outside, the rain began again, tapping a relentless rhythm against the wooden walls, a reminder that even in moments of communal strength, the past could resurface at any time. In that fragile darkness, the promise of safety was intermingled with the stark knowledge that every new day would demand courage beyond measure. Thomas rose slowly, eyes fixed on the rain-washed horizon as if seeking guidance in its ceaseless cadence. "We cannot change what has been written," he murmured softly, "but we can choose how to face it." His words, imbued with the quiet fortitude of a man who had seen too much and lost even more, settled over the homestead like a solemn vow. Martha stepped beside him, her gentle hand finding his, and together they shared a look that spoke volumes of silent understanding and shared resolve. In that moment, the Rourke homestead was no longer simply a refuge from loneliness. It had become a battleground where the scars of yesterday would either prove to be insurmountable or serve as the foundation for a future forged by courage, compassion, and an unyielding will to survive. The note, a stark reminder of lingering vendettas, lay crumpled in Thomas's hand, its presence a clarion call to the hard truths they could no longer ignore. Yet even as the shadows deepened around them, an ember of hope glowed faintly in every eye, an ember that dared to believe in the possibility of renewal. As darkness claimed the land completely and every creaking sound seemed amplified against the quiet backdrop of the night, the promise of a new dawn lingered. Together, they would meet the challenges that lay ahead, united not solely by circumstance, but by a bond that transcended old wounds and the bitter echoes of an unforgiving past. With hearts steeled by resolve and a tender hope that survival might birth something beautiful, they prepared to face the impending storm, each one a crucial thread in the tapestry of a family reborn out of necessity and love. In the gentle, relentless cadence of the rain, as night wrapped the homestead in its cool embrace, an unspoken promise took root, that no matter how deep the scars of the past, the courage to embrace tomorrow would be the salve for all wounds. And as Thomas, Martha, Caleb, Lena, Benji, Sally, and little Milo huddled in the sanctuary they had built together, the first whispers of a new destiny began to stir, quiet yet insistent, like the soft murmur of hope beneath the thunder of an inevitable storm. A fragile, determined silence settled over them, a silence that held within it the seeds of both sorrow and salvation, and in that quiet, every soul dared to dream of a future where the past would no longer hold them hostage. In that almost tangible moment of unity, the homestead, with its weathered walls and steadfast hearts, stood poised on the edge of a new beginning, ready to face whatever trials might come with the first light of day. The morning sun rose blood orange over Dust Haven, casting long bruised shadows across the Rourke homestead. It painted the fields in gold, but there was no peace in its beauty today. Not after the rider's warning. Not after the note, now folded and tucked away in Thomas's coat like a wound refusing to close. The children sensed it in the way Martha moved slower in the kitchen, her thoughts lost behind her eyes, and in the way Thomas lingered at the barn door longer than usual, checking his rifle more times than necessary. Caleb, always the first to notice the shift in the wind, had barely slept. His mind kept circling the stranger's eyes, cold and unreadable. That man hadn't come to deliver a threat. He'd come to remind them they were being watched. Hunted maybe. Caleb didn't know why, but his gut told him the storm on the horizon wasn't just wind and dust. He stood at the edge of the property now, hands balled into fists, watching the road as if he could will it to reveal the truth. Lena approached silently, her small frame wrapped in an oversized shawl. "They're afraid," she said quietly, nodding back toward the house where Benji and Sally clung to each other, and little Milo sat motionless, staring out the window with wide, unblinking eyes. "I know," Caleb replied. "So am I." Lena nodded, not surprised. "But they look to you. You're their voice. You always were." Caleb looked at her, brow furrowed. "I'm not the voice they need." "No," she said, "but you might be the only one they'll listen to." A silence passed between them. Not awkward, just full of things unspoken. Finally, Caleb asked, "What do you think they want?" Lena's eyes drifted toward the distant ridge. "Whatever it is, it's not forgiveness." Inside, Thomas spread the note across the table, its ink smudged from the night's damp. Martha sat across from him, her hands still dusted with flour from the morning's half-finished biscuits. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" she asked. "No," he said. "But the message is clear. We're on land they think belongs to them. Or something, or someone, they think does." Martha frowned. "You think it's about the children?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But they didn't come asking. They came warning. That means they're not planning to negotiate." She leaned back, sighing. This place was quiet for so long. And now it's like trouble came riding straight through our front door. Thomas folded the note and tapped it against the table, thinking, "I need to talk to Caleb." He found the boy at the edge of the field, his posture rigid, defiant. "Got a moment?" Thomas asked. Caleb shrugged but didn't move. Thomas walked up beside him, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "You've done good keeping them safe. That's not easy." Caleb didn't look at him. "It's what had to be done." Thomas nodded. "That kind of thinking, what has to be done, that's the kind of man this land makes. It's hard. It breaks most folks." Caleb finally turned to look at him. "We don't get to break." "No," Thomas agreed. "You don't. Not with them counting on you." There was something hard in Caleb's eyes, something older than his years. "You gonna send us away?" Thomas was taken aback. "What? You said you'd help. But now there's danger. You gonna change your mind?" "No," Thomas said, voice low and steady. "I'm not going anywhere. Neither are you." Caleb's stance relaxed just a fraction. "Then what do? "We prepare," Thomas said. "We learn what we can, fortify what we have, and we protect what matters." Over the next few days the homestead transformed. Thomas taught Caleb how to check the fences for signs of tampering. Lena helped Martha boil water and patch together an emergency supply of medicine from herbs and cloth bandages. Even Benji, despite his fear, learned how to handle a slingshot, his small hands steady with a focus born from desperation. The family operated like clockwork, silent, determined, each moment filled with purpose. But tension curled beneath the surface. At night they took turns keeping watch. The children didn't ask for lullabies anymore. Then came the tracks. Thomas found them at dawn, hoof prints, deep and deliberate, circling the far edge of the property. No riders in sight, just the calling card of someone who wanted them to know they weren't alone. He called Caleb over, pointing at the ground. "See the spread here? Heavy. Large horse. Probably carrying more than just a man." Caleb crouched beside him, tracing the indentation with a fingertip. "Saddlebag? Or a second weapon?" They exchanged a look. No words needed. Back inside, Martha brought out an old map of the area, creased and yellowed. There's only one way in from the east without crossing the ridge, she said, tapping a finger near a canyon path. If they're circling, they'll come through there eventually. Thomas studied the route. Then that's where we wait. Later that day, Thomas and Caleb rode out to the canyon, hidden among jagged rocks and spiny brush. They set traps, not to kill, just to warn, and marked hidden vantage points. Caleb practiced with the rifle, awkward at first but slowly learning the rhythm of breath and pull. Thomas didn't rush him. Every bullet counted. That night, around the small fire behind the barn, Martha told the children a story. Not about outlaws or war, but about a girl who grew a garden in the middle of a battlefield. How she planted seeds while bullets flew, believing that something could still bloom. Sally fell asleep on her shoulder. Benji didn't ask if it was true. Thomas watched them from the porch, quiet. "They're starting to feel like ours," he said softly. Martha turned to him, her voice low. "They already are. But peace never lingers long in places like Dust Haven." At the edge of twilight, another rider came. He didn't approach the house. He stood on the hill beyond the fence line, silhouette carved against the setting sun like a phantom from a legend. No movement, no greeting. Just presence. Caleb saw him first and ran to the porch, heart pounding. "He's back." Thomas came out with his rifle slung low. He didn't aim, yet. Just watched. Then the rider raised a hand and tossed something into the dirt. Heavy. Dark. Thomas walked slowly to retrieve it, keeping the stranger in sight. Inside the sack, bones. Small. Fragile. Not human. But there was a note. "Next time it'll be yours." Thomas's jaw clenched. "He wants a war." Martha's hand found his shoulder. "And if we don't give it to him? Then he'll take everything." Back in the house, they laid the sack on the table. Caleb stared at it, face blank. "We can't keep running," he said. "We're not," Thomas replied. "Then what are we doing?" "We're drawing a line." That night they reinforced the homestead. Wooden beams against doors. Metal hinges fixed. Every window covered. They dug a shallow trench around the barn and strung up a bell system using wire and tin plates. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. And just before sunrise, as the sky turned a bruised purple, Thomas stood at the edge of the porch and whispered a promise into the wind. "You want to test us? Fine. Come see what happens when a man with nothing finds something worth fighting for." Behind him, Caleb stood tall. Beside him, Martha, Lena, and the rest. The homestead had become a fortress. Not of stone or steel, but of blood, grit, and love. And whatever war was coming, they would meet it together. Because the past could chase them, but it couldn't own them. Not anymore. The first shot rang out before sunrise. It cracked the silence like a bone snapping clean through. The sound echoed through Dust Haven's dry hills, waking the world in a violent jolt. Caleb was already on the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder, when the bell system clattered near the barn. A shadow moved through the outer field, then vanished behind the line of stacked hay bales. Thomas kicked open the front door and stepped out into the pink-gray dawn. "Positions," he barked, voice hard as iron. There was no more time for fear. Only reflex and grit. Lena ushered Benji, Sally, and Milo into the root cellar, small, dark, and dry. "Stay quiet. Stay low," she whispered, her eyes sharp despite the tremor in her hand. She kissed each of their foreheads like it might be the last time. Martha, already loading the shotgun, nodded at Lena. "Go. They need you up there." The Rourke homestead, once a quiet stretch of farmland and wooden fences, now bore the weight of war. Sandbags lined the porch. The barn door had been reinforced with iron planks. Every creaking board, every window pane, was fortified not by wealth or militia, but by the desperate hands of people with nothing left to lose. Thomas crouched behind the old trough near the horse corral, his rifle aimed toward the east ridge. Caleb lay belly flat on the porch roof, scanning the terrain below through a cracked scope. His breath fogged the glass. His heart slammed in his chest. "They're moving," he muttered. "South fence. You know, 3 figures. Slow." Thomas adjusted his aim. "They testing us." Another shot. This one hit the old well post, splitting wood with a dry snap. "They ain't testing," Thomas growled. "They're marking territory." One of the figures sprinted forward, raising his rifle. Caleb exhaled and fired. The recoil shoved his shoulder back, but the bullet flew straight. The man crumpled before he hit the ground. Inside the house, Martha watched from the parlor window. Her knuckles were white around the shotgun. Lena moved silently behind her, gathering jars of pitch and rags, makeshift firebombs just in case it came to that. "They're not bandits," Lena said quietly. Martha didn't look away. "No. They're worse. They're men with purpose. A yell rose from the tree line. 2 more riders charged forward, hooves thunderous on dry earth. Caleb adjusted and fired again, missed the first but clipped the second. The horse shrieked. The rider fell and didn't get back up. Damn it, Thomas cursed under his breath. They're trying to flank the barn. I'll go, Caleb said. Thomas shook his head. You're more use up high. I'm faster, Caleb insisted. For a heartbeat, Thomas hesitated. Then he nodded. Take the south ladder. Keep low. Caleb slid down the porch rail, rifle slung across his back. He dashed across the yard, ducking behind the chicken coop, boots kicking up dust. A bullet whizzed past his ear. He dove into the barn just as 2 figures broke from the trees, charging hard. Caleb climbed the interior ladder and took aim through the slats. 1 shot. 1 down. The second man froze, then dropped his weapon and ran. Inside the root cellar, Benji clutched Sally's hand. Do you think they'll get in? He whispered. No, Sally said firmly, though her voice shook. Papa won't let them. Benji frowned. He's not really our papa. Sally looked toward the hatch above them. Maybe not before. But now. He is. Milo didn't say anything. He just reached for Sally's other hand and closed his eyes. Outside, smoke had begun to rise. One of the pitch jars had hit its mark. The front yard was a chaos of light and sound. Gunfire, shouting, the scream of panicked horses. The invaders hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected a family to fight like soldiers. One of them, tall and mean-eyed, made it to the porch steps. He kicked open the door and barged inside, shotgun raised. Martha stood ready, calm. She fired once. He dropped before he could even shout. Lena exhaled. How many more? Thomas's voice called from outside. Too many. At the barn, Caleb had run out of bullets. He reached for the backup revolver Thomas had given him and stared at the 6 chambers like they held his soul. 2 left. He spotted another figure crouching near the far fence, signaling to someone beyond view. Caleb took aim. Pulled the trigger. The man collapsed. 1 left. And then it happened. A horse burst through the trees, black as coal, its rider unmistakable. The man from before. The one who had left the sack of bones. He didn't wear a mask. His eyes were cold, empty. His rifle hung lazily at his side, but he didn't raise it. He just watched. Thomas stepped out from behind the water trough, rifle raised. Looking for something? He called out. The man dismounted. Not something, he said calmly. Someone. The tension in the air turned solid. You want me? Thomas said, jaw tight. The man tilted his head. You took what wasn't yours. Martha stepped onto the porch. We took children. Orphans. Left to die. They weren't yours to save. Caleb climbed down from the barn, slowly approaching. His hands shook, but his voice didn't. You think they belong to you? The man looked at him. Something flickered behind his eyes. Their blood. Caleb's heart dropped into his boots. Blood. You're their kin? The man nodded. Uncle. Legal guardian after the fire. You think I didn't look for them? But then word came, a farmer took them in. Thought they'd just been taken by God. Thomas stepped between them. You don't get to show up with a gang and claim family. I didn't come for a reunion, the man said. I came for what's mine. You forfeited that right the moment you sent men with guns, Thomas said coldly. The man's hand drifted toward his rifle. Thomas didn't blink. Walk away, Thomas said. You walk now and maybe you live to see another sunset. The man hesitated. His jaw worked, eyes flicking to the barn, the house, the scorched ground, the fallen men. I'll be back, he said finally. You can't keep them forever. They ain't prisoners, Thomas replied. They're home. The man mounted his horse. Spurred it hard. Dust kicked up in his wake. They watched until he disappeared. Silence returned. Not peace, just quiet. Caleb stood in the center of the yard, arms loose at his sides, revolver hanging in his grip. The morning sun rose behind him, painting him in fire. Lena walked to his side. You okay? Caleb didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. Yeah, I think I am. Inside the root cellar, Sally opened the hatch. Is it over? Martha helped her climb out. For now. The children emerged into the sunlight, blinking. Benji ran to Caleb and hugged him tightly. I knew you'd protect us. Caleb hugged him back, fierce. Always. That evening, the family sat around the dinner table, bruised, bandaged, exhausted. But together. Alive. Thomas raised his glass. To family. They echoed it, quiet and strong. To family. Outside, the horizon burned with the last of the day's light. Somewhere out there, trouble still stirred. But in here, in this house built by love and defended by blood, there was something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb allowed himself to believe. Maybe they weren't alone anymore. The weeks that followed were deceptively quiet. Dust Haven held its breath under a hot, humming sun. The wildflowers wilted in the fields, the wind grew meaner, and every rustle in the brush had Thomas reaching for his rifle. There were no more riders, no more sacks filled with threats. But the stillness was a promise, not a reprieve. Everyone knew the man who claimed blood kinship hadn't given up. Caleb trained harder than ever. He ran the fence lines before breakfast and practiced with the revolver until his palms were raw. Thomas watched him with silent approval, correcting his stance, testing his resolve. Caleb didn't complain. Fear had become fuel. Not just for him, but for all of them. Lena was sharper too. She learned to clean and load firearms. She memorized escape routes through the canyons and began mapping every rock and ravine that could serve as cover. She didn't just prepare for a siege, she prepared for war. But beneath the steel of her eyes lived something more dangerous: determination. Martha baked bread like always, but her movements carried a new weight. She packed satchels beneath the table with bandages and dried jerky. Just in case. Her strength no longer wore an apron. It wore silence and steady hands. The children returned to their routines, feeding chickens, drawing on old scraps of paper, laughing now and then, but something inside them had shifted. Their eyes darted more often toward the windows. They slept lighter. And yet, they clung to each other like survivors learning what it meant to feel safe. Then just before dusk on a blistering Friday, the dog barked. A deep, guttural snarl. Thomas stepped onto the porch, rifle slung low. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. Dust curled over the road like a ghost in flight. Riders, Caleb called from the barn loft. 4. No. 5. Coming fast. Thomas turned to Martha. Get them inside. She nodded and moved swiftly, gathering the children without a word. Lena appeared beside Caleb. Same man. Hard to tell, Caleb muttered. But they're dressed for hell. Thomas checked the gates. No time to prepare like before. No warning shot this time. Whoever was coming wanted blood, and they meant to spill it quick. The riders didn't slow when they hit the front path. They dismounted in a cloud of dust, rifles already drawn. The man at the lead stepped forward, his face too calm, too collected. It was him. He tipped his hat. Evening. Thomas stood firm. I told you to walk away. I did. Thought you might come to your senses. He gestured casually. But it seems you've doubled down. They're not going anywhere, Thomas said, his voice like gravel. You're not taking them. The man sighed. They're blood. They're scared of you. Fear ain't the same as hate, the man replied, smiling slightly. But hate comes easy when someone feeds it. You been feeding them lies, Rourke? No lies, Thomas said. Just truth. And you don't own them. The man's eyes cooled. Step aside. This ends with or without you. Thomas didn't flinch. Then it ends with me. The moment shattered. Gunfire exploded like thunder. Lena ducked behind the well and returned fire, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. Caleb darted from the barn, taking up position beside a trough. Bullets tore through fence posts. The dog howled and charged. One of the riders fell screaming, his legs shredded. Thomas fired with practiced calm, dropping a second man who tried circling behind the henhouse. The shooter didn't rise again. Inside the house, Martha crouched low, her shotgun resting on the window ledge. Sally sat curled beneath the table, Milo clutching her sleeve. Benji held a kitchen knife in both trembling hands. Martha whispered, Not unless you have to, baby. Outside, the world became fire and dust. Caleb hit the ground hard as a bullet grazed his shoulder. Lena crawled to him, dragging him behind the water barrel. You good? She asked, breath ragged. Caleb winced. Still breathing. Then you're fine. Across the yard, the lead man moved like a viper, too fast, too sure. He ducked behind a wagon, returned fire, and clipped Thomas in the thigh. Thomas stumbled but didn't go down. He pulled himself behind the porch and growled, Caleb. Caleb sprang from cover, firing the last of his rounds. The rider dodged, rolled, and came up firing. Caleb dropped behind the trough again, heart thudding in his ears. One rider remained besides the leader. He tried to flank the house, but Martha was waiting. Her shotgun blast lifted him off his feet. He hit the ground like a sack of rocks. Only one left. The uncle. The children's so-called family. He stood now in the middle of the yard, blood spattered across his shirt. This how you want it? He shouted. With blood in the dirt? Caleb stepped forward, gun empty but unshaking. That's not our blood. It's yours. The man sneered. You think I'm afraid of a boy? I'm not afraid of you either, Caleb said. You left them. After the fire. You didn't even look. I did look, the man said. I just didn't like what I found. They're not a burden, Caleb said. They're family. And what are you? The man snapped. Some orphan with a guilt complex? Caleb walked closer, eyes blazing. No, I'm their brother. And you're not taking them. The man raised his rifle. Crack. He staggered backward. Blood bloomed on his chest. Lena stood behind him, rifle steady, hands trembling. I warned you, she said. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide. He looked at Caleb, lips parting like he might still say something. But no sound came. He fell face first into the dirt. The silence afterward wasn't relief. It was release. Thomas limped from the porch. Martha came out slowly, followed by the children. They moved toward the center of the yard, where the dust still hung like smoke. Caleb stood over the man's body, breathing hard. Lena touched his shoulder. You okay? He nodded, but tears burned in his eyes. He was their uncle. Thomas placed a firm hand on Caleb's back. And you were their salvation. The children didn't run. They walked to Caleb, silent, unsure. Sally reached up and took his hand. Benji stepped beside him. Milo wrapped his arms around his leg. No one said it. They didn't need to. That night, after the bodies were buried on the edge of the property, Thomas lit a fire in the hearth. The wind howled outside, but inside there was warmth. Real warmth. Not from the flames, but from the closeness. They sat around the table. No feast. Just soup and silence. Thomas raised his glass. To the ones we lost. They echoed it soft. To the ones we saved. Then after a long pause, Caleb looked up. His voice was small. Do you think we can stay? Martha reached for his hand. This is your home. Benji grinned. Forever. Thomas smiled faintly. Long as you want it. The fire crackled. And Caleb, who once wandered a wasteland with nothing but fear in his chest, felt something bloom in his ribcage. Belonging. Real fierce earned. Later, as the stars climbed over Dust Haven, Thomas stepped onto the porch and looked out over the land. Lena joined him. You think more'll come? She asked. He shook his head. Not after tonight. Then what now? He looked back toward the house, where laughter had started to return. Now we live. We raise them. And we give them the one thing nobody ever gave us. What's that? Hope. Lena smiled. Inside, Caleb tucked the children into bed, his movements gentle. He whispered stories, the kind with heroes and redemption. The kind where family wasn't given, it was chosen. Outside, the prairie wind shifted. And somewhere deep in the silence, something old and broken finally healed.